I think one of the least talked about aspects of narcissistic abuse, and one of its most insidious and destructive properties, is that in time it can start to turn the victim into a narcissist themselves. And I've said this in previous videos, and it's not a theory that I've come up with by myself. You know, if you have watched Sam Vaknin's videos before, he's a firm believer, and I agree that narcissism is contagious. And in this video, I'm going to talk about some of my experiences that have led me to believe this theory very strongly. Because through some of my experience, and particularly through the intense periods of narcissistic abuse that I went through, I believe that I displayed at least 3 times significant traits of narcissistic personality disorder myself, albeit temporarily. And those 3 instances, I think, gave me a really, really clear insight and understanding that allows me to truly diagnose the behaviour, but also allows me to be slightly compassionate towards the narcissist, albeit compassion with limits. Now, this will be a slightly lengthy video, but I'd urge you to stick around to the end, because I think understanding the nature of this and truly understanding the nature of it can help you understand how you need to heal yourself and why you need to heal yourself to prevent you going down a dark path. And if you've watched my previous videos, you'll notice that I'm not keen on focusing only what the narcissist does and how they abuse us. But while I feel like there's a need for it to understand the narcissist and understand how bad it can get, ultimately just focusing on that area doesn't help resolve the problems that you need to fix in yourself in order to, first of all, leave the narcissist, but also to make sure you never ever do it again, never repeat that behavior and end up with another narcissist, which you're likely to, because in order to be with a narcissist and sustain a relationship with a narcissist, ultimately there has to be something wrong with you as well. And that's the area to focus on. But before I go into the details of where I believe I displayed narcissistic traits, first of all, I'd like to give a warning that if you are going through specific abuse right now and you're in an emotional state, some of these examples may be slightly triggering to you. So it may be worth you coming back when you're in a bit more of a calm state, or go watch some of my other videos that may help as well. And also, as usual, if you like these videos and you find them helpful, the best way that you can support the channel and help it reach more people is to hit the like button, to subscribe to the channel so you see future videos, and also leave any comments that you have in the comment section below and ask any questions that you have in there, and I will try and reply to them. So as we get into the first example, I think it's important to make clear that I don't believe I suffer from narcissistic personality disorder, or that I did during this intense time. Because in order to suffer from the disorder, it has to be over a sustained period of time, and it has to be something that's repeatable. What I believe is that I experienced some of the individual instances and some of the behaviours that are defined within narcissistic personality disorder while I was undergoing intense pain. And as I said, that gave me some very clear insight into the nature of that behaviour that we see in narcissists. And the first incident I'll go into is where I believe that I treated someone like a narcissistic supplier, that I extracted my emotional needs from them without a real clear regard for what they wanted. And this incident happened in 2018, when after a couple of years of continuous narcissistic abuse, I found out that my wife was having a full sexual affair with someone that she had met. And in true narcissistic style, while she was in the feeding frenzy phase, I like to call it, my regards were completely ignored, and she was very deep in the, I think, reveling in the control and the manipulation. So the night I found out about the affair, she left me to go and be with him, and I thought at that point she'd probably pretty much left and we'd split up. But in true narcissistic style, she came back the next morning, actually phoned me up the next morning like a drug addict, sort of, explaining herself and wondering what she was doing, but then continued to do that for about the next 2 or 3 weeks with zero regard for how I felt about it. And that would mean effectively telling me, while living at the house, that she was just going to go and see someone this weekend and stay there and then come back on Monday. And to go into some gruesome detail here, what made that extremely painful for me is that I also found out one of the things that raised my suspicions was that she was going back on birth control. So these evenings and weekends that she would go there, I had to go through the torture of imagining what was going on and also kind of knowing what was going on in more detail than I really wanted to. And that's something she would also divulge along the way as well. And after about 3 weeks of that, I felt like I needed to take action to really force myself to get out of the house, because I was an absolute mess. I'd been through kind of suicidal attempts. I'd gone absolutely crazy. So I did the most stupid thing I could possibly do, and I joined Tinder. And that was an eye-opening event and something I hope to never repeat again. But I did go on a couple of dates, just coffee dates, meeting people at coffee shops, things like that. And one person I met on there, we exchanged numbers and we were talking through WhatsApp for a while. And about a week after that, my ex had arranged to go and stay in a hotel with her new supply and had told me all about it and was basically telling me I was overreacting and that I just need to deal with it. And that night I begged her not to go. I said, look, let's try and work it out, in a stupid, codependent way. And she said no and went to do it anyway. And that night, stupidly, I ended up having a one-night stand with the person I'd met. I think she was extremely lonely as well. I was in extreme pain. And I had a one-night stand that felt very out of control and something I regret deeply. But to the point of where I think it displayed narcissistic traits is I went into that situation, albeit with another person as consenting adults and knowing what we were getting into. But I went into it with the pure intention of making myself feel better. And I say the pure intention, it's not like I wanted to hurt anyone or be mean, but I knew deep down as an adult that you can't have sexual relationships with someone without emotion, really. And I knew that I didn't want another relationship. But the pain I was feeling at that time was so intense. I was feeling worthless. It took my sense of self-worth away. And I felt like absolutely nobody wanted me. I had no worth. And that attention from someone else, that potential admiration, felt like it healed my pain, albeit temporarily. And as soon as it was over, I instantly regretted it and instantly wanted to leave. And what made it worse is that person, I think, deep down wanted to have a proper relationship, but was probably going through something similar. But all I wanted from that experience was for my pain to go away. And I wish, I don't drink alcohol at all, but I wish my vice was to drink a bottle of whiskey or something and drown my sorrows, but it wasn't. And that was the behavior I undertook. And that gave me a real insight into that kind of somatic nature, the sexual urge nature of narcissists, that if your pain is that intense, that feeling of someone being into you is enough to temporarily soothe it. And it did that for me. But when I look back at it, that is classic narcissistic behavior. And that's something I need to take stock of. And that's something I still look at today. And that's something I still try to make sure that I'm governing today, just to make sure that when I look at my behavior now, that I'm not doing anything that looks out of control, and I'm certainly not hurting anyone else. So the other trait of narcissistic personality disorder that I believe I experienced, and I've only experienced it once in my life, and it was a bizarre thing to go through, was dissociation. So if you're not sure about what dissociation is, it's effectively like a split personality. It's dissociating from your personality to protect yourself from pain or damage psychologically. And at this time, my ex was still seeing her new supplier, was still having a sexual relationship with him, still not using birth control. But she'd kind of come out of the feeding frenzy stage. She was kind of getting back a lot more into the manipulation stage. And I think trying to keep me where I was and trying to keep him on the hook as well. So trying effectively to have her cake and eat it at the same time. So was deeply manipulative, deeply trying to push emotional buttons, knowing that I was in a very disturbed emotional state. So had a lot more control over me. And one of the methods she used, which I truly believe was pure manipulation, was to tell me that she thought she was pregnant and that she didn't know whose it would be, because this was still quite close after I'd found out. Now, the reason this is deeply personal and hard for me to talk about is about a year before this happened, we'd actually got pregnant and went through a miscarriage. And that's something that I think at the time I didn't realize how hard it had hit me, and we'd never had children. I never really thought I wanted children, but the feeling of being pregnant, of my ex being pregnant, was a feeling that I can't explain. It gave me like a sense of happiness and warmth that I'd never ever experienced before. And I think realistically, going through something like a miscarriage with someone who's narcissistic is quite difficult as the man, or as the receiver of the narcissistic abuse, because you don't really get permission to grieve very much. It very much becomes about the narcissist and their pain. And I feel really bad saying that, because I think as a woman going through a miscarriage is a very traumatic thing, and maybe more traumatic than the man, probably more traumatic. But given the selfish nature of narcissism, there's definitely a sense that I'm not allowed to feel bad about it. And I really did. And the moment she told me that she thought she was pregnant, I think her intention was to make me really emotionally unstable and to make me cry and to make me feel like childlike again and be under her control. But actually the opposite happened. And it was like a switch in my brain turned, and I can't explain it. It's something you have to experience yourself to really understand. But But the only way I can describe it, it's like my brain said to me, like, you know what, Ian, don't worry, I've got this, leave this to me. And a switch went off, and I just became the most pragmatic, unemotional, detached person, slightly angry as well, but not angry in a way that I wanted to get mad at her, just angry in that I'm not dealing with this right now. And for the next week, I just wouldn't entertain the conversation. You know, I think I went from, my normal response to something like that would be probably quite emotional, probably quite supportive. I think my words back to her were something like, don't expect me to sit around for 9 months waiting to see if it's mine. Tell your new boyfriend to do that. If you have a DNA test and it turns out to be mine, I'll do the right thing. And that's honestly how I felt at the time, which is very unlike me. I'm normally much more of a nurturing person, but I think I'd been through so much pain and so much abuse that my brain just would not let me take that kind of pain. It's almost like my mind knew that I couldn't cope with it, and it just wouldn't allow me to do it. And I felt like a different person, and I felt like all of the emotion, all of the pain that I'd gone through, all the unstableness just suddenly disappeared, and I went into fight or flight mode. But I was still very aware, I was still very conscious, and in a way I was able to cope with things a lot better because my mind just went down to pragmatic, functional behaviour and no emotional behaviour. And it returned to normal later on, but it was a good week, maybe 2 weeks, where it just would not cope. And in a way, it did me a great favour because it allowed me to get through that trauma well. And I think that kind of dissociation is something that narcissists experience quite regularly. And I think it gives me some insight into the kind of trauma that they've been through and how they learn to dissociate and cut their emotions off through things. And I know my ex in the past, and I genuinely believe it, has lapses of memory where I think she's dissociated, where painful events come up as she's gone through therapy and remembered painful things. There are lapses in memory where she's done something similar. And going through that myself really gave me an insight into that dissociative condition and effectively how your brain can make you behave like a completely different person if you're under too much pain. And I think that's a lot of what we experience when the narcissist appears to be extremely evil, appears to be extremely cold. I think a lot of the time that can be down to dissociation, and when they get overly emotional, overly stressed, they can become a different person. And that's not to say we should cope with that. It's just, it gave me an absolute insight into why and how that comes around. And the other narcissistic trait I think I experienced that really made me think and really made me want to quarantine myself was the idealization and devaluation of a new person that you've met. And that happened back in about April or May of this year. After I'd gone through telling my ex I was leaving and filing for divorce and going through that, I met a lady that I was doing language lessons with, and we got to know each other fairly well, and we became attracted to each other. And the thing that was interesting to me about that is I remember thinking very quickly that she was everything that my ex wasn't. You know, she seemed happy and outgoing and laughed a lot and seemed very bold and confident. And I was really, really attracted to that. And it really drew me into thinking. And I remember thinking that this woman has everything, you know, she's got everything that I need. And that happened very, very quickly. And I was really, really tempted to get into a relationship with her. But on the flip side, as quickly as that happened, within a month or two, I remember one incident happening, and I think she was just having a bad day or just said something slightly negative about my relationship with my ex. And I remember my mind just flipping and turning completely the other way and just thinking, I don't want anything to do with this, and just completely devaluing someone. And that makes me sound like a terrible person. I realise that, but it really made me think about this is the over-idealisation of someone and the devaluing of someone in action. And it's not something I sought to do. You know, I think going through it, the feelings I felt at the time felt real and it felt healthy. But when I look at it rationally and I look at how quickly it happened and knowing the state I must have been in, I had to tell myself that this isn't normal behaviour and this isn't how relationships should be. And, you know, I've been on the planet over 40 years and I've met as many people as I'm going to meet from all over the world. And I know that people are just people, that nobody's perfect, nobody's ideal, and people have their traits. And if you're lucky, you find someone with common interests and you can share some good time together. But it was the attitude towards thinking that she was everything that my ex wasn't, everything I needed, made me really think about this isn't normal. And what really made it difficult, what made me think about it very hard is that I kind of had to back myself out of the situation, which meant hurting somebody else again. And it's not like I'd done anything intentionally to hurt anyone, but I realised that I'm just on a long-term car crash and I'm involving other people. And actually what I need to do is isolate myself, sort myself out, heal myself before I kind of really reintroduce myself back to the world in a healthy way again. And again, I think that's something that narcissists go through. And again, I think that's something that can give me some insight into narcissists. You know, I don't believe that they go out to hurt people intentionally. There's an element to that when they're in that feeding frenzy. There's an element to enjoying the control and enjoying feeling smart and like they've got control over people. But I think they're just in a tailspin most of the time and are being reactive rather than proactive in their actions. And what they feel at the time feels real to them. But actually, when you look at the actions on paper, you realize that this isn't normal behavior, and that's why you end up with long-term personality disorders that are destructive to their lives, because they're making lots and lots of in-the-moment decisions that feel right to them at the time. But when you look back at them and look at the evidence and look at the statistics effectively, you have to say, well, this indicates a pattern of not normal behavior. And when I look at those three incidents and I think, okay, what's the point? It's given me some insight into the individual drivers and why certain behaviors happen. Ultimately, what's the point? Like, what can I extract from that? What can I conclude and summarize from that? And I think the point is this, is that even normal people, even healthy people, under extreme pressure and extreme pain, can do what narcissists do. And I consider myself a fairly decent, well-balanced person. But obviously under those scenarios, I was acting in the way that a narcissist can act. And why was I doing that? It was because I was in extreme pain and extreme unbalance that I just couldn't bear. I would do anything to avoid some of those painful situations. And the cognitive dissonance, the psychological imbalance that I was experiencing led me to feel things that aren't rational and aren't real. So what does that tell us about the narcissist? It feels like they're doing exactly the same thing. And the only difference that I can conclude between a normal, healthy person and someone with narcissistic personality disorder isn't that I think they're evil. It's that they're far more sensitive. They're living in a constant state of pain, whereas normal, healthy people aren't. And that makes a lot of sense. The theory being that they've had deep psychological wounds inflicted on them in early childhood years that are continuing to cause them pain and psychological imbalance into their adult life. And not only that, I was exposed to intense psychological pain and narcissistic abuse for a short period of time. So when my narcissistic traits were displayed, it was because I was under an acute, short-term period of intense pain. But once I could remove that pain, I could start behaving normally again. And that's the key for the narcissist. In order to stop behaving like a narcissist, they need to be able to remove that pain. But that's a very difficult thing to do because the thorn for me was very obvious. The thorn in my side was visible. It was there. I could feel it. I could touch it. But I don't believe that exists for the narcissist. I don't believe they can really understand or see what's causing them pain. But there's another huge difference as well in that when narcissistic abuse started happening to me in my early 20s and then again really intensely in my late 30s, I was already a formed person. My personality had already been developed and fortunately, and thank God, my morals and my ethics were instilled by a mother and father that were decent, good people. And that's a significant difference to what happens to most narcissists. The narcissistic abuse they suffer is in their formative childhood years. So the personality they form is one that adapts and evolves to deal with that kind of intense manipulation and intense pain that they're suffering. They don't get a chance to form a normal personality. The personality they form is that of one that is learning to be a narcissist. So there is no default for them to fall back to, unlike a normal person. So for you or I, we remove the pain, we start to isolate ourselves, and we can return to the person, or very close to the person that we were before we met the narcissist. But there is no chance of doing that for the narcissist. There is no person before the narcissist. That's just what they were born into. And I don't think there's a solution for that. So I think my summary for this whole video is the reason I'm telling you that I think anyone can be a narcissist is to highlight the reasons why narcissistic behavior exists, but also to give a good reason and a good explanation as to why you shouldn't expect the narcissist to be able to solve themselves. There is no person for them to fall back on. The narcissist is effectively who they are. And I don't think that's an easy thing to solve whatsoever. Some think it's impossible, and I think it might be marginally possible with an extreme amount of work. But for someone on the receiving end of the abuse, that's not something you should hold on to. The real answer is to remove yourself from the narcissistic relationship and move on and pray for that person to heal themselves.